The screams that echoed through the Forum Romanum on that September morning in 146 BC weren't from gladiators or criminals facing execution. They came from something far more calculated, far more systematic than anything the Roman crowds had witnessed before. As the last defenders of Carthage lay dying in their burning city, their wives and daughters were already being catalogued, sorted and prepared for fates that would make their husbands' deaths seem merciful by comparison. You think you know Roman history, the legions, the conquests, the glory of empire. But there's another side to Roman expansion that historians have buried in dusty archives for good reason. A methodical approach to victory that turned human suffering into imperial policy and transformed the wives of enemies into instruments of psychological warfare that would echo through generations. Before we descend into this forgotten chapter of Roman brutality, if you're fascinated by the darker truths of ancient history, consider subscribing. Your support helps us uncover these buried stories that reveal the true cost of empire. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's incredible that we can share these historical discoveries across the world. When Roman legions achieved victory, what followed wasn't chaos or uncontrolled pillaging. It was procedure. Carefully documented, systematically implemented procedure that had been refined through centuries of conquest. The moment enemy resistance collapsed, Roman commanders activated what military manuals called the captivity protocols, administrative procedures that treated human beings like inventory to be processed and distributed. The morning after Carthage fell, Roman scribes began their work with bureaucratic precision. Women were separated from children, sorted by age and physical condition, then assigned numerical designations that reduced them to entries in ledgers. These weren't abstract statistics. They were mothers, daughters, sisters who had watched their husbands die defending their city walls. Now they stood naked in public squares, while Roman officials calculated their market value like livestock. The sorting process followed strict guidelines developed through generations of Roman conquest. Women between 15 and 30 comprised the most valuable category, marked for immediate transport to slave markets in Rome and other major cities. Those between 30 and 45 were designated for manual labor in imperial projects, their strength to be consumed building the very monuments that would celebrate their homeland's destruction. Women over 45 faced immediate execution alongside captured male warriors, deemed too old to justify the cost of feeding during transport. But it was the children who revealed the true sophistication of Roman psychological warfare. Boys under 10 were selected for adoption into Roman families, their identities to be systematically erased and replaced with Roman names, Roman gods, Roman loyalty. Girls under 12 entered what Roman documents euphemistically termed preparation programs, designed to train them for specific roles within the imperial household system. The genius of Roman conquest lay not just in military superiority, but in understanding that destroying enemy cultures required destroying family bonds. Mothers were forced to watch this sorting process, seeing their children assigned to different categories, knowing they would never see them again. The Romans had learned that this psychological trauma would spread throughout conquered populations, making future resistance less likely. Contemporary accounts from Roman historians like Livy and Tacitus describe these procedures with matter-of-fact precision that reveals how normalized such practices had become. When Tacitus writes about the conquest of Britain, he notes that 23,000 women and through the Capitidi children were processivity protocols after the fall of Camulodunum. He records this information alongside casualty figures and captured treasure, treating human suffering as just. Another administrative detail. The scale of what happened after major victories provides insight into the systematic nature of Roman practices. Within 72 hours of Jerusalem's fall in 70 AD, approximately 60,000 women and children had for transport. Rome had been catalogued and prepare shipping manifests from the period list human cargo alongside gold, silver, and exotic spices. A typical might read, 40 entry amphora of wine, 20 talents of silver, 37 females aged 16 to 25 years, excellent condition. The women weren't granted even the dignity of names in these documents, just ages, physical descriptions, and estimated values. This systematic dehumanization was an administrator's hat accidental. Roman discovered that treating captives like commodities made the psychological manipulation more effective for both the victims and their captors. The economic infrastructure supporting this system stretched across the entire Roman Empire. Specialized markets in major cities maintained dedicated sections for human trafficking, with established pricing structures that fluctuated based on supply and demand. A young Gallic woman might command 50 denarii in Roman markets, while Germanic women brought different prices depending on their physical characteristics and perceived docility. Roman law codified these practices in documents that survive in archives today. The Codex Captivitas established clear procedures for what they termed population processing. Adult males over 14 were systematically executed, not in the heat of battle, but in organized groups after surrender. This wasn't about eliminating military threats. Boys as young as 8 were also killed if they showed signs of potential resistance. The Romans had learned that leaving male survivors, even children, created future problems. But for males, execution was reserve. Women faced something the Romans considered far more valuable than death. They became raw material for imperial expansion, their bodies and minds to be reshaped in service of Roman power. The processing began immediately after capture with procedures designed to break psychological resistance before physical transport even began. Women were stripped of clothing, personal posse items that might remind them of their previous essions, and any lives. They were assigned numbers and basic garments that marked their status as Roman property. Roman guards were instructed to speak only Latin to captives, beginning the linguistic transformation that would erase their cultural identities. Those who attempted to speak their native languages faced immediate punishment, designed to associate their birth culture with pain and humiliation. The transportation system that moved these human commodities across enterprise, Roman sophisticated as any commercial the empire was, as engineers designed specialized ships with cargo holds modify, complete with vent D for human transportation systems, water storage and waste management calculated to keep valuable cargo alive during weeks-long voyages. Maritime archaeological evidence reveals the grim efficiency of these vessels. Sleeping platforms were constructed toization, with barely maximized space, little enough room for captives to lie on their sides. Feeding schedules were calculated to provide minimum nutrition necessary for survival, while iron restraints prevented movement that might damage valuable merchandise during rough seas. The mortality rate during transport averaged 15%, a figure Roman administrators considered acceptable losses. Women who died during voyages were simply thrown overboard, their deaths recorded in ledgers alongside spoiled grain or damaged pottery. The empire's accountants viewed human cargo through purely economic calculations that reduced individual suffering to statistical variations in profit margins. But the true horror wasn't in the ships or the markets. It was in what awaited the survivors at their destinations, where Roman law had created systems of exploitation that transformed women into instruments of cultural destruction, while simultaneously serving the sexual and reproductive needs of Roman citizens. The legal framework that governed the treatment of captured women reveals the methodical nature of Roman psychological warfare. The legal framework that governed captured women existed in a grey zone that Roman jurists had deliberately crafted to maximize exploitation while maintaining the facade of civilization. The lex captiva, codified during Augustus's reign, established that conquered women automatically lost all previous legal status the moment their homeland fell to Roman arms. They ceased to be wives, mothers, or citizens of any nation. They became what Roman law termed res nullius, things belonging to no one, available for appropriation by Roman citizens. This legal transformation wasn't merely bureaucratic convenience. It was psychological warfare refined into jurisprudence. A woman who had been a respected matron in Gaul or Germania would wake up in Roman territory to discover that her marriage no longer existed in the eyes of law, her children were no longer hers, and her very identity had been legislatively erased. Roman magistrates would explain these legal realities with clinical precision, ensuring that captives understood the totality of their loss. The destination cities where these women arrived had developed specialized infrastructure to process and integrate human cargo into Roman society. Archaeological excavations in Pompeii have revealed residential complexes with standardized living quarters designed specifically for housing women. These concha weren't merely slave quarters, they were transformation centers where systematic programs reshaped foreign women into Roman property. The process began with what Roman administrators called cultural purification. Captured women were assigned to Roman matrons who supervised their integration into imperial society. These weren't acts of kindness. They were calculated programs designed to destroy psychological resistance while creating useful servants. The supervising matrons received tax incentives for successful transformations, creating economic incentives for thoroughness in breaking the spirits of conquered women. Language became the first battleground in this cultural destruction. Women who spoke their native tongues faced escalating punishments designed to create pain associations with their birth cultures. Those who mastered Latin quickly received better food and living conditions, while those who resisted linguistic conversion found themselves assigned to the most brutal manual labor. The message was unmistakable: embrace Roman culture or suffer the consequences. Religious conversion followed linguistic transformation with equal systematic precision. Captured women were forced to participate in Roman religious ceremonies, often required to perform ritual acts that directly contradicted their previous beliefs. Celtic priestesses were made to tend Roman temples. Germanic women who had worshipped forest spirits were compelled to sacrifice to Roman gods in public ceremonies, designed to maximize their psychological distress. The Romans understood that forcing conquered peoples to violate their deepest beliefs, resistance psyche created trauma that made ideologically impossible. Women who completed these religious humiliations often experienced what modern psychology would recognize as learned helplessness, a state of psychological surrender that made them compliant tools of Roman power. But perhaps the most sophisticated element of Roman psychological warfare involved the systematic destruction of family bonds through controlled reproduction. Roman law gave masters complete authority over the reproductive lives of female captives. Pregnancy became a weapon wielded against conquered women, with calculated precision designed to create biological chains that made escape psychologically impossible. Roman breeding programs operated with scientific methodology that treated human reproduction like agricultural cultivation. Women were paired with selected partners based on characteristics deemed valuable to the empire. Strong Germanic women might be bred with Roman soldiers to produce children suitable for military service. Intelligent Greek captives were paired with Roman intellectuals to create offspring who could serve in administrative roles. The children born from these forced unions faced predetermined fates based on gender and perceived potential. Boys showing promise were often separated from their mothers at age 5 and inducted into Roman military or administrative training programs. The separation process was deliberately traumatic, designed to break maternal bonds while demonstrating complete Roman control over family structures. Girls born in these circumstances entered specialized education programs that prepared them for roles as servants, entertainers, or breeding stock for future generations. They were raised speaking only Latin, worshipping only Roman gods, knowing nothing of their mother's original cultures. The Romans had created a system that used conquered women to produce new generations of Romans from their own bodies. The Roman Empire's systematic exploitation of conquered women wasn't an aberration of ancient warfare. It was deliberate policy that operated for over 5 centuries, documented in their own records with bureaucratic precision. These practices shaped the lives of millions, created cultural trauma that persisted for generations, and remind us how quickly civilized societies can normalize the unthinkable when power goes unchecked. The archives are there, waiting for historians willing to confront this uncomfortable truth about the true cost of empire.